This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. At this year's Icarus Festival, following a screening of The Exorcist, I sat down with Khachiyan and Jack Mason to discuss the rise of the counterculture in American history, and also the rise, perhaps, of evil in America. This is my interview with Khachiyan and Jack Mason. So here we are, the second panel of the second Icarus annual festival. And I'm very, very, very happy to say that we have Khachiyan and Jack Mason on the stage here together. Something I've been wanting to put together for a very long time, as the organizers of Icarus Fest can tell you, and it actually happened. So here we are, and we are the Icarus Fringe and Film Festival, and so we showed the Exorcist film in the Rivoli Theater just before this. I'm sure many of you have seen the film before. Tomorrow, the three of us will be discussing another film, very different film, The Fountainhead, and so that'll be showing tomorrow as well before the panel, so definitely check out both and come to both panels. So here we are. This film, The Exorcist, I saw it when I was born in 1965, and so it came out in 1973, and my parents got divorced in 1970. And if you know the film at all, you know that it's about not just a girl who gets possessed by the devil, it's about a girl who doesn't have a father, and her father is absent, and I think that's a major thing we're going to talk about. But I noticed when I first saw that film, when I think I was a teenager, maybe in the 80s, I just thought, this is the scariest movie I've ever seen. And that's all I thought. A girl with her head spinning around and vomiting and all the rest of it. I just thought, this is the scariest film, and I didn't have any other thoughts about it. Then I listened to Jack Mason talk on he did an entire episode about it, and I saw it in an entirely different way. And Anna's mentioned a couple things about it as well. And I watched it last night for like the 8th or 9th time, and I know Anna had a similar experience watching it for the nth time and seeing it differently. I saw an entirely different movie, and I told Jack this just before this happened out in the plaza. It's an entirely different movie to me now. I mean, it's still extremely scary and disturbing and unsettling, of course, but I noticed that it begins with the context of America in the early 70s, when I was a young boy, divorced family, etc., living in a sort of a hippie family, countercultural family in Berkeley, California, right? Very similar in some ways to the context of the movie, of the story. You see in this movie and in the book, The Exorcist, you see anti-war protests all over the country, and they're making a movie about the anti-war protests, right? And you see single families. It's about, again, as I said, this divorced family, this single mom raising this child by herself. And then you see, and this is so important, I think, and I had never noticed this somehow, you see the psychiatric industry intervene militantly right away. There's something wrong with this girl, it must be psychological or medical. You see doctors intervene. So the medical and psychological establishments intervene right away. And they're enormous and they're so powerful, and this was true in the 60s and 70s, that they ended up strapping this little girl to a gurney and operating on her brain, right? And that's not fiction. That actually happened in a large number of cases throughout the 20th century with people, especially girls and women, who were considered to be abnormal or aberrant in some way. And then the church arrives. The Catholic Church comes in and says, no, it's actually not something that can be detected by science or scientific medicine. It can only be dealt with by religion. Our religion tells us what's really going on with this girl. She is possessed by an actual demon that is doing evil in the world, and we are the only ones who can exorcise it, right? Now that is why I think I didn't notice the themes, the actual themes of the movie for many years, because I was raised in an atheist, secular, communist family. I was not allowed to notice that in a way, right? That it really is in many ways a pro-Catholic, pro-Christian, pro-religion movie. At least that's how I see it. I'm curious how they do. And to me, that upset the whole thing. I mean, it just turned everything upside down in my mind about what this movie and this book and this story are about. And I don't even know what to think beyond that now, except that it did raise things that we were not allowed to think in the 1970s and since, with the secularization of American society, right? We're not allowed to think such things, that the church might know something, that the church might have some actual answers. And I'm not saying they do. I'm not endorsing it, but that's what the movie says. And it was enormously popular, maybe not for that reason, but it was enormously popular. And it also caused fainting spells and hysterias and vomiting and psychosis and people fainting in the movie theaters all across the country. And it changed the American popular culture, I think, in many ways. I'm not exactly sure about, and that's why I wanted to talk to them about this, because these two, I think, are more incisive than just about anything when it comes to cultural criticism. And so I'm glad to have them here to talk about this, to help me think about it. Jack, I mean, you've talked about it on your show as, in many ways, a story about religion, Catholicism, Christianity. But let's talk about sort of, first of all, if you've watched the movie recently, I'm sure it was shocking because none of that would be allowed in today's movies or TV shows, right? I mean, the level, the obscenities, I mean, everything that she does, this possessed little girl, I can't imagine that appearing on our screens today. So let's just talk about that first, like what's happened, what the difference between movies in the 1970s and movies now. Like that is just immense. Let's just start there, the gulf between those two things.
Well, The Exorcist is something that could only happen in 1973. You have to consider that the MPAA rating system only arose about 5 years before that. Less than 10 years before that, it was like old movies with no profanity. It was The Sound of Music. Then you have this extremely high-budgeted R-rated movie, which would be an X or an NC-17. It obviously should have been an X, but because it was such a prestige thing, they let it through. Along with Last Tango in Paris, which was, I think, 72, these represent cinema going as far as it possibly could in every direction. So the fact that The Exorcist uses child actors, the famous crucifix scene, all of this would never be allowed today. The actors were all like famously injured, received permanent back injuries. William Friedkin was like a totally crazy guy. He fired off guns around them to give them a look of hollow fear at all times. This was something that changed the fabric of America and kind of unleashed a certain demonic spirit. And it's something that people don't realize how extreme it is because it's such a integral part of pop culture, and every year there's 10 PG-13 Exorcist movies for like Mexican teenagers to go watch at the multiplex. And it works because it's from a point of sincere religious faith by a non-believing director, and it assumes that Satan is real, that evil is real, and that the only way of dealing with this problem of possession, as you said, is faith and belief.
Anna, please.
Yeah, so you've pretty much summed it up. Like my impressions when I watched it for like, I don't know, the 7th or 8th time. I should just like get off the stage and pack it in because I have really nothing to add. But I will say that watching it this time around, I definitely detected this theme of intervention by the medical and psychiatric professions in this girl's life. And all of these people, by the way, had no idea what was going on. They were wrong. They submitted her to like a horrible and painful spinal tap. And then I forgot what the test was called. I have it in my notes, but I'm not going to pull it up. And one of the actually most chilling scenes in the movie is when they do a brain x-ray and it comes up clean because they suspect that she has some kind of lesion that's generating abnormal, bizarre, perverted behavior, like antisocial behavior. But the other thing that really dawned on me was that this movie is not about Reagan, the little girl, at all. It's about the crisis of faith that Damien Karras, the young priest, experiences. And it's funny that you chose The Exorcist and The Fountainhead as the two movies that we're going to discuss, because they are both about a man who has integrity and who comes to suffer for it. In the case of Howard Rourke, he undergoes no such crisis of faith. In the case of Damien Karras, he has to kind of suffer through darkness, through a brush with the devil. I think that the final scene where he tells the demon to go into him and throws himself out of the window, that metaphor couldn't be more on the nose. It's his wrestling match with Satan, but nonetheless, he maintains some level of integrity. And the other thing that I wanted to point out was I have a friend called Matthew Wilder. He's a screenwriter, and he basically told me yesterday what you just said, that at the time when this film came out, he was also a child, maybe around 10 or something, that people would like throw up and have seizures and miscarry in the theater. And back then, the film was overwhelmingly popular and well received, but in his view, people loved the film, but nobody actually enjoyed it. And it was generally seen as this very painful hazing ritual or collective ordeal that the American public had to go through to achieve some kind of catharsis for Vietnam and Watergate. So in that light, for example, Damien Karras being Greek, he's like an ethnic white who's left behind, is interesting because, Greeks, as far as I know, are Orthodox, right? They're not usually Catholic. And he could have just as well been like Italian. So I think that also has something to do with it. And actually, Kurt, who's here in the audience, mentioned in one of our group chats that Friedkin, after making this movie, I think maybe didn't convert to Christianity, but started to believe in Christ.
Well, you mentioned this movie as like basically a hazing ritual, and this movie caused psychiatric disorders for years. I mean, I went back and looked at like academic papers from 1975 talking about children and adults who had seen it, who were just depressed and totally changed forever for months, had to go to doctors. I mean, this movie has probably had the biggest impact on my life of any movie and it ruined my life. I still, at least once or twice a year, will have Exorcist-themed nightmares. It started for me in about 4th grade. I saw like 5 minutes of it on TV late at night, not even involving Reagan or the really gory stuff. And that was enough to give me what I now recognize as sort of mild obsessive compulsive disorder, like doing rituals in my head, like saying, I will not get possessed, I will not get possessed. At that time, probably like 1997, Marilyn Manson was everywhere in pop culture too. I was young enough to be really scared by him. Antichrist Superstar was kind of linked in my head with this. I had such a fear of it that I like couldn't even look at the VHS cover in the store. I knew that my mother had gone to see it when it came out and walked out maybe 20 minutes. And she just hated it so much. And then my worst fear came true. In 5th grade, they re-released it. I was watching TV innocently, and the commercial came on TV. And I thought, no, no, no. But then I was like entering middle school, and you kind of want to do tough things as a kid. So I started expressing an interest in it. And my parents bought me like a 25-cent copy of the paperback. I read it in 2 sittings on a camping trip loved it, and then eventually they rented the movie for me, and I kind of got over it for a while. And since then, I've seen the movie, maybe more times than I've seen anything. But the impact of that and the particular intensity of it, and there's like a handful of movies from the early 70s that express this new extremity and this new kind of negativity and lostness in American culture. Last House on the Left is another one from the year before. I said Last Tango in Paris, but the world has really never recovered. And once you see, as you said, Thad, about how it's really about like single mothers, how there's no fathers in this world. The lighter stuff that I really love in the movie that's very like novelistic is Chris McNeil, Ellen Burstyn's movie career. They're shooting that really hilarious movie about like 60s campus protests. Her 70s polyester, burnt orange cowl neck sweater, bumpy zipper, tight armhole style. It's all very itchy, polyester, 70s, uncomfortable. It just has this this feeling of total discomfort.
Yeah, I would feel possessed too if I had to wear that kind of clothing all the time. And the other like obvious, like glaring metaphor is that the girl is going through puberty. If Reagan was real and around today, they just cut her tits off.
Oh.
I'm kidding. Too topical.
But it is about...
Yes, no, let's stay there.
Then there's this very obvious, palpable anxiety that Chris has because she's a single mother and the father's kind of a deadbeat dad who's off like carousing and doing movie stuff in Europe. That very important scene. I mean, I've only seen this movie once since I had a kid of my own, so I was kind of honing in, focusing on all the mother stuff. And I think, like, yeah, as I said, the movie is really about Damien Karras. I think it's also about Chris McNeil. Reagan is sort of like the last person that it's really about. But the scene when the director and possibly her lover, Burke Dennings, is thrown from the window.
Austin Powers.
Yeah, and his head is twisted around in kind of a superhuman feat. That obviously plays to the anxiety that a lot of women, especially single mothers, feel about bringing, various men home who may or may not be interested in them because they can molest their kids.
And that's what they think happened at first. I mean, they are all like, Burke would never do anything alone with her.
Yeah,
but then
why would he be in the room?
Yeah, why would he be in the room with her? There have been all kinds of academic studies of The Exorcist saying it's about fear of female sexuality, dovetailing with the rise of feminism in the early 70s. And I've always thought that the movie is scariest in the first half before the total transformation happens to Reagan. None of the vomiting or the scarred face or any of that is as scary as the scene. And you know what scene I'm talking about because to this day, every copy of the book falls open to the same page because it's what everyone looks for. And that's the scene that would never get made today, which is Reagan masturbating with the crucifix and then shoving her mother's head in her vagina saying, lick me, and then throwing her across the room. Blood is on Ellen Burstyn's face. That's the point. That's the scariest thing ever filmed. I mean, really, like it never gets any scarier after that, no matter what the special effects do, because that's still somehow in the real world. Like that, when it goes over into total, floating and kind of fantasy, that's less scary than why is this happening? Why is this permitted to be shown on screen?
Yeah, I mean, remember that A&E show Hoarders?
Yeah, of course.
There was a scene that was very much like that scene in A&E Hoarders. Or it wasn't Hoarders, excuse me, it was the one about drug addicts, where there was a girl who was wearing like a t-shirt with no pants on in her bed, which was strewn with like garbage in front of her dad. Like she fully had her vagina out in front of her dad, and I think that's why it's so scary, because it breaks kind of the parent-child barrier. And I think this movie is also really about moms. Like, Karras's primary guilt is that he abandoned his mom. and left her in New York and came to Georgetown. He's very open and frank about his guilt, and I think Chris must have some kind of latent subconscious guilt over the fact that she's essentially failing or abandoning her daughter by leaving her for and or two men. So there's this like multi-generational cyclical thing where there are no fathers to be found, and like aside from the obvious stand-ins for fathers, which are the priests, there's also this like satanic father.
I would like for you to just keep talking.
And the only father that shows up is gay, which people say that, people always said Kara seems gay, and until like 2 years ago when I reread the book, I thought that was an exaggeration, but no, it is really there in the book, and also everything that the possessed Reagan says to them is horrifying because it's true, because she can psychically read them. Mm-hmm. So, to my eyes, it always looked like Karras was a pretty good son. I mean, he goes to visit the mother. He didn't totally abandon her, but he has this classic Norman Bates gay guilt of getting away from his mother at all. And, his little world has no women in it. He just hangs out with that one really
the other
gay
guy who's in musical theater.
Yeah, so it takes Happy Pride. It takes an LGBT king to defeat this threat from the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's I think the other scariest scene in The Exorcist. I mean, first of all, this is probably one of the best films ever made. It's one of the few actually scary films ever made, even within the horror genre where films are like overwhelmingly not scary. And it owes that to like the incredible film score and sound editing, which I think very deservedly won an Oscar, and also to the extremely slow build-up to the actual possession, which is not so scary at all, as Jack mentioned. Once it's all out in the open, because of how mundane and uncanny it is. Once Reagan becomes fully possessed and is like the pea soup puking green-eyed demon, she's no longer mundane nor uncanny. But the other scariest scene in my mind is the opening scene in northern Iraq with Father Marin, where they're like digging at like Nineveh or something for like Mesopotamian architectural artifacts, and he has like this standoff with this like Richard Hanania-like demon called Pazuzu.
Don't bring Twitter into this,
with
please.
Burning biblical eyes, and it famously opens on like the azan, the Islamic call to prayer, right, or some kind of Islamic song, and that's very scary because it's like this mysterious foreign element. On one hand, this is a culture that is older and wiser and very superstitious and cautious, knows not to kick the hornet's nest and unleash evil, whereas all the white man's archaeological games, scratch the surface, scratch the soil, and unleash this powerful demon upon the world. But it's also the way that the kind of locals are depicted. It's like the man with the cataract or the woman walking down the street in ninja gear from behind is meant to also convey this doomed and gloomy environment of like stifling, flinty evil. And I think Marin's colleague, right before he's leaving back to the United States, tells him like, well, it's evil against evil, because the kind of theosophy or whatever you would call it over there in pre-Abrahamic times was deities and demons fighting other deities and demons. They had no concept of like a single Abrahamic God. So that, I think, really seeds a lot of like dread into the heart of the viewer. And it reminds me, of like Israel-Palestine, this like ancient biblical conflict that's evil against evil and will never get solved.
And that, I think about that northern Iraq sequence all the time because if you ever go into Zara, it's the same experience. It feels exactly like that, just as evil and oily. But what does the demon actually represent? Okay, there's a point where Marin and Karis are talking, and the demon has been unloading all these like cunty truths to all of them in the bedroom and like reading them for filth. And the demon, with its constant stream of diarrhea and masturbation and profanity and belief in nothing, just represents reducing humanity to base functions and believing that humanity is capable of nothing else. It's just shit, piss, vomit, all of these bodily functions. And that's a great moment in the book where they explain that, because that's just a deeper level than saying, oh, it's Satan taking this little girl. No, it represents having no belief in anything. It represents nihilism.
Yeah, and doesn't Marin say that, it wants to demoralize us? It wants to believe that people are animal and ugly and that that's all they're good for. And I think that that's probably why the film was so cathartic when it came out and continues to be, because it does have this very positive, and I wouldn't say upbeat, like trad angle that you can triumph through a return to faith. How that return to faith is undertaken, I don't know, but the moral of the story is basically a very conservative one.
Yeah, it's very conservative, and what The Exorcist does that's so smart is not providing just an obvious little like math equation reason for why Reagan gets possessed. There's nothing that traumatic that happens to her. I feel like if this were written now, current screenwriting conventions make it so that there has to be a trauma. They would make it about just strictly she was sexually abused or something like this. No, like even though she has like a Hollywood single mother who's dating Austin Powers, her life is pretty good. The mother hangs out with her, plays with her. It's just this general foreboding evil of the 70s, like this textural evil of the 70s and this new liberation that's conspiring here.
Okay. That was amazing. I'm still reeling this in. I guess I will say, I'll give a little history to this just to add some context and have you guys riff on this. So the Catholic Church was originally, as I understand it, sort of split on the movie. Weren't thrilled about endorsing it, given all the content in the movie, right? But then I think ultimately there were many Catholic sort of theologians and sort of public intellectuals who more or less said, yeah, this is a pro-Catholic movie and a pro-Catholic story. And I think they just explained why. And I sort of said at the beginning, I mean, the Catholic Church, the priests save not just Reagan, but humanity, right, from the devil. And it's sort of obvious in that way. Interestingly, Protestants, Protestant churches, Protestant intellectuals, Protestant public figures denounced it thoroughly, totally, all the time, called it pornographic, etc. Satanic, pornographic, shouldn't be watched. And to me, I've never been a Catholic or a Protestant, but I've always been somewhat more sympathetic to Catholicism for this reason, because they've never been, generally speaking, the church has been more or less afraid of discussing the body parts, the body fluids, the disgusting, the nasty, the vulgar, the profane, right? And then they battle it. And they battle it in a way that's not about repression, psychological repression. Don't speak it. That's the Protestant way. Catholics, generally speaking, again, and I'm mostly talking about American Catholics, which is what the movie is about, like to talk about things in the open. And they battle it not almost physically, literally physically in the movie, right? The final scene, in a sense, is that priest, Damien, literally battling that demon and then taking it on. But I just thought it was interesting that there was a difference between sort of American Protestantism, which is all about you don't talk about evil, right? You don't countenance it, and you certainly don't demonstrate it or show it in a movie, so don't watch this movie. Whereas many Catholics were like, go watch the movie. And all the talk about, stabbing your vagina with a crucifix and making your mother whatever, I mean, just constant, like, stream of the most incredible vulgarities you've ever heard. Many of Catholics wanted people to see this movie, right? And so I just wanted to note that. That was an
Well-
interesting split there within Christianity about this movie.
I think it's understandable that many people objected to this movie because it's something that has its cake and eats it too, because it's drawing in audiences with the promise of degradation and profanity and violence and filth and shocking content, but it bookends it with a moral message, which is why it's so unique and why it's so has this particular magic that nothing that it spawned has. Anything that continues to feature this theme of possession now doesn't really address religion directly, doesn't really address morals. Like they recently did a sequel to The Exorcist, like a woke sequel to it, where you can imagine what happens. They don't have Christianity come in and save the girl. They have a coexist bumper sticker of the different world religions come circle around a white girl and a black girl who were simultaneously possessed. And through this, it's actually, the Christianity is so reduced that it's sort of like a voodoo black woman who does like Hades stuff in a bathtub, like Florida water, little like bottles of like voodoo stuff, that is shown as knowing the most about this particular problem.
It's like Haiti. Yeah, and I think The Exorcist is really like the definitive refutation of also this like very like normie-con provincial fear of like pedophilia and satanic panics. This fear of showing anything subversive or degenerate through art because it might be used to corrupt or defile, because as it turns out you have to depict it one way or another to wring the moral message out of it meaningfully.
And okay, did The Exorcist unleash a new 56-year tidal wave of sincere Christian faith? Even if that's what you read in the movie, which I think is correct. No, it didn't. What it unleashed was half a century of explicit satanic imagery. Rosemary's Baby came before that in 1968, and that was the first thing that so directly dealt with satanic cults. The Manson family happened shortly after that. There was this new fear of hippies and kind of paganism, a sense that things had turned bad. But because of the profitability of The Exorcist, what it unleashed was things like The Omen, which is an excellent big-budget 70s movie, but it's something that is basically flatly satanic and intent. There's no spiritual message, there's no moral message. It's basically just sort of this celebration of the birth of the Antichrist with people trying to stop it and failing. So The Omen has a different, darker, creepier feeling than The Exorcist, and it's kind of hollow. Did anything else that The Exorcist spawned attempt to reckon sincerely with Christian faith? No. So people's objections to The Exorcist, I think, are valid. It's just this thing, this black hole that was dropped on the world that people haven't recovered from since.
Yeah, I keep thinking about the two father figures in the movie. So one is absent and a deadbeat. He's shooting movies in Rome. And the other ends up being Damien, the priest, who sacrifices himself, right? And so it ends with this ultimate act of self-sacrifice, which, for better or worse, is at the root of Christianity, right? That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to sacrifice your actual body for God, right? That's Matthew and Romans, etc. Selflessness, asceticism, self-sacrifice, things I have always been critical of, by the way, and we're going to talk about that, but that is certainly at the core of the movie. And there's a powerful message in there. I mean, there are, of course, self-sacrifice is necessary for civilization to exist in some form, right? There's got to be some sort of sacrifice. So the question is, how much sacrifice are we willing to undertake for civilization or any functioning society or any sort of moral community to exist. But I guess that's, to me, maybe the real moral crux of the movie is about that. Is about, are you willing to give your very life for everyone else? And he did, Damien, the priest at the end. And the father, the actual biological father of this girl, was not interested at all. So let's now maybe extend this a bit and talk now about the politics which Jack just did. The politics since then, since 1973. The world, America, the world we live in, since then, so this is my lifetime we're talking about. I guess as you guys are talking, and just incredibly brilliant critiques of this movie, but I'm thinking the whole time, what is your personal investments in this, right? Politically, and I can kind of guess, knowing both of you, at least how you think. It seems to me you're sort of obviously sympathetic, at least to some extent, to this ethic of self-sacrifice, especially maybe among men, and maybe that's what's been missing for the last 50-some years, right? Again, I'm a product of divorce. It wasn't my father who left, it was my mother, right? So that was the lack of self-sacrifice in my life that affected me, and it affected many, many other people in my generation. The Gen X generation were the divorce generation. And you see the depictions, as I said, the context, right, of the movie, of the story, is the 70s. It was the period, it was the me generation, right, famously. It was the generation, the time of self-expression. It was the time of sensuality, of free sex and all that, drugs, et cetera, and I was among that. I saw this, it's true. But that was largely about celebration of the self against the collective. And since then, my politics has been about that, just in different ways, but I've been about sort of the celebration or the defense of the individual and the self against the collective, against all the requirements for self-sacrifice of the collective. So this is where my politics and their politics might be in tension, and this is what I really wanted to talk to them about. Because I see you two as being both very much individualistic, certainly in the way that you talk about the world, which is often at odds with the world. The collective wisdom is something that you often usually critique, attack, are not happy with. But then you see in this movie and in this story this ethic of self-sacrifice, which you also see as being heroic and necessary and good. I don't know, this is the tension in my mind that I've been thinking about, and I don't even know where I'm going with this, but I'd love for you to talk about it, if it makes sense.
Way over my head.
Yeah. No, it's not. Is that not like your basic critique of the world around, is that there is narcissism, right, that is dominant, that's become dominant in the world,
yes,
which is about the self against the collective, against the community, against society?
But I think the dangerous thing that happened is that the kind of individual narcissism that was kind of thriving in the 1970s, that like Christopher Lash or somebody wrote about, has become something much more dangerous and calcified, which is a kind of group narcissism that occurs through group identity. I feel like now, in this day and age, we suffer, maybe we should save this for the fountainhead discussion, but I would say we suffer from too much collectivism. And that's kind of Ayn Rand's basic thesis that she saw coming way before everyone, and which she's so reviled for. But it's essentially that narcissism manifests through a kind of covert or vulnerable style inverse narcissism, where you are basically pretending to speak for the vulnerable and the marginalized, the Ellsworth Toohey type character who disdains genius or excellence because it implicates the mediocre.
Yeah, I think there's been far too much self-sacrifice, especially from men, especially from white men. I mean, that's the whole basis of like the current version of liberalism, like 2010's woke liberalism, is putting everyone else's needs before your own in the abstract, and that's what results in the catastrophic climate of now, because no one will like really stand up for their own beliefs and stand up for their own abilities. I don't know, it just doesn't really connect with the symbolic one-on-one self-sacrifice depicted in The Exorcist of like one priest specifically taking the demon into him. But yeah, I don't know. I think men especially need to be standing up for themselves.
Wow, I'm so glad to hear both of you say that. But I wonder, though, I mean, Reagan's father is not acting as a collectivist. He's acting on his own, right? He just wants to get pussy in Rome or whatever he's doing. Yeah.
But the kind of atmosphere of 70s degeneracy and degradation goes along with the subsequent career of Linda Blair, which emphasizes the kind of sordid qualities of The Exorcist, because after getting famous for The Exorcist, doing it at 12 years old, getting an Oscar nomination, she went on to do sordid women in prison movies, softcore porno. She did a famous TV movie called Born Innocent when she was 15.
Scarred me.
Which caused them to change the types of content that you could show early in the day on TV because there were so many complaints about it.
Wait,
but
what was the movie?
Born Innocent,
Well,
where
Nature of the movie.
Let me tell you, she gets raped with a broken bottle in prison.
by a bunch of girls. It's a broomstick, actually.
Broomsticks, my bad. I'll never forget it otherwise, yeah.
But she did a whole bunch of these movies after that, and then kind of B movies, where she did a bunch of nudity, Roller Boogie, Savage Streets. In the 80s, it was women in prison. She posed for Playboy. She dated Rick James. By all means, for being, I can't imagine the pressure of being identified with that specific character for your entire life because of a decision that you and your parents made at 12 years old. Which is something that now people are very overly concerned with, like the ethics of movie making in this way. Like, can anyone truly consent? Can child actors truly consent? But that added to the kind of sordid reputation of The Exorcist, just seeing the girl from it descend into this kind of like 70s like jacuzzi tub joke for a long time.
I mean, I've said this about like individual figures, somebody like Joan Didion, who was like a watershed figure in the sense that she was immensely talented and important to American culture and the arts, but she's, in her capacity as a watershed figure, spawned a bunch of horrendous acolytes and imitators. And in some ways, you can argue that people like that, and also works of art like that, do, by definition, necessarily create some sort of negative effect along with the good that they bring into the world. I think the guy who played Karras, his name is Jason Miller, he's the father of Jason Patrick, really also never had another role like that. I mean, how could you, right? With something that incredible, and he ended up moving to like Philadelphia or New Jersey. He's from Queens originally, and starting a playhouse. So he had a pretty quiet and respectable life as a working actor. But I think no one except for Ellen Burstyn really landed on their feet after that production. And
yeah,
also,
Ellen Burstyn and Max von Sydow were both kind of like hermetically sealed character actors that could go on.
And also,
Okay.
he was so young when that movie was made.
Yeah, Max von Sydow, the aging makeup was so incredible because Max von Sydow was like 40 in it, and he's playing an 80-year-old, and so you'll see him in stuff in the late 80s, and he's still like young. I forget that he was that young.
Okay, but back to this thing though about selflessness or selfishness, and I think sort of maybe the main undercurrent theme of the movie and of my life is that a whole lot of people who had children in the 60s and 70s lost interest and became much more interested in their boyfriends or girlfriends or cocaine or going elsewhere and doing other things and living their life. And to this day, I'm immensely ambivalent about this for obvious reasons, but because my politics says, go for it, girl. Leave the family, go do your thing. But as a son, it's not so much. And then, so I look at the movie and I think about sort of my generation and subsequent generations who've been all divorced generations to some extent. And I wonder, what does this mean and which side should I be on here? So again, I want to press you, both of you, on this question about selflessness versus self-interest, and just about your own politics about that. My politics are one for self-interest. That's what my politics are for. But my heart, maybe, and my history tell me something different. But is that not, I mean, Anna, you've talked a lot about narcissism in popular culture, which we see everywhere, and to me it sort of depends on how you define narcissism. But I just would like for you to just talk about that. I mean, is this something that bothers you? Is it that this whole multiple generations have given up on sacrificing themselves for children, for America, for their city, whatever it is, for a cause, for God?
Well, I mean, like in the case of somebody like Harris, he like consciously takes a vow of poverty and becomes a man of the faith. And you know, his uncle, when they're visiting his mother, tells him like, "Dimi, you could have been Park Avenue psychiatrist or whatever." So I think you have to be like, you know, as Dasha says always, you have to be like very honest and vigilant about your desires, and only then can you strike like the correct balance of self-sacrifice and self-interest. To me, those things are not entirely counterpoised. Very often your self-sacrifice dovetails with your self-interest. For instance, in the case of Karras, he makes this self-sacrificial, almost Jesus-like gesture. He ends his own life, but it absolves him of guilt and finally gives him peace. It finally reconciles his own like fight with his gayness or whatever. And here's a question I have for you guys. Given that this guy technically commits suicide, is he saved or not?
I'm not Catholic, so I don't know about all the technicalities about suicide.
I think it's like, I'm not Catholic either, but I think it's like the greatest sin.
If there's like a demon inside you,
Yeah,
can you?
I don't know. I mean, remember that, I'm assuming it's a post-Exorcist, or maybe the Sentinel, about the fashion model who like has an abortion and then attempts suicide and ends up also being like dogged and possessed by figures from the underworld. And you know, there's that famous scene in the attic where she becomes kind of the guardian, the sentinel to the Hellmouth, that famously was very controversial because they cast actual like freaks, like deformed people to encircle her.
Yeah, that had really bad vibes. I felt bad. That was one of those like 70s. They went too far things because they have actual like just retarded people and people without arms and stuff representing demons coming to get Christina Rains from Nashville in this attic. I don't know. I feel like you're talking about the kind of Welbeck elementary particles, absolutely fabulous like 60s like hippie parenting where the children get ignored and you know. That it's turned into a very different thing today because you don't see as much of that as just culturally like white people don't have kids until they have one when they're maybe 43. So nobody has the opportunity to like neglect Safi anymore. You know?
But that's seen maybe I think correctly as a degree of selfishness, right? I mean, I know that I've known many women who have chosen not to have kids or have kids late who have been told that they're selfish for not having children.
I don't know anyone.
I don't know. No, all I hear is like basically white people and, you know, the more degrees you have, the more college you have, the more you say, oh, I don't want to bring kids into this world. It's already like overpopulated. I just want to like eat Uber Eats for the rest of my life. And then everybody around like 38 really realizes there's not much else to do and that just like eating out every night and traveling is kind of meaningless. And so you have to think about what you're going to do for the next 40 years you're alive. And that's when they have that one like test tube baby.
Yeah, which by the way, amazing news. They keep circulating this study that's like clearly targeted to women like me on Instagram and Twitter. That's like, if you have a child after 35, you have like a 50% more likelihood to live into your 90s, and if you have a child after 40, you're 100% likely to live to 100 or whatever. And I don't know what the real numbers are, but my reaction to that is like, why on earth would I want to live until I'm 95? Like Father Marin, no thanks. But yeah, I think it is a kind of selfishness that comes out of demoralization and nihilism, one of the things that I got the most heat for back in the day was that I said that all these women feminists who are really, really concerned about abortion and protecting abortion rights and so on, are clearly doing it for lifestyle reasons. They don't want to take a hit to their lifestyles, and they'll talk a big game about like housing costs and like the price of groceries and how hard it is to live, blah blah blah, and they'll invoke poor black women in red states. But it is clearly just, I think a lot of people, because people are growing up so much later and becoming mature so much later because they don't have any consequences in life and don't have to sacrifice anything, have no receptors.
50 is the new 30.
Yeah, it really is amazing news.
Well, and also gay liberation also resulted in people having less kids, which is Friedkin connected because Friedkin made a movie called Cruising, which is now very famous and popular, but which is kind of, I see as a companion piece to The Exorcist. It was protested by like gay rights people at the time, famously. Gay people all love it now. But it's...
Wait, talk about this? So I actually
You've
haven't
never seen Cruising?
I've
Oh,
never
you'd
seen-
love that.
I know.
You'd love that.
I've gotta
It's
watch
funny that he hired Al Pacino, right? That was Al
Yeah.
Pacino, yeah. So he's not gay, Friedkin. But
No.
he had a type.
Well, I've heard he was gay. I knew
Okay.
someone who...
Well,
he got a bunch of facelifts and looked kind of like Michael Cimino by the end. And I know someone who went to his house and said there was like a Boogie Nights style like pool boy going around. And he married John Moreau, which is like a real gay guy.
Yeah.
I have
thing.
a pool boy at every one of my parties. But do you? So talk about cruising, because that was a big deal in the 80s.
Yeah, this was when gay people were all about positive representation. Through like The Celluloid Closet, which was by Vito Russo.
Sorry, same director as The Exorcist, Friedkin.
Same director as The Exorcist, and same tone as The Exorcist, and same sinister feeling of urban evil as The Exorcist. But it was 1980, and this was about leather bars in New York and a murderer going around and killing gay men. He made the leather bars a lot scarier than they actually were. These places would have been playing like Donna Summer, but he had them playing like hardcore punk and like metal music. And
Gays love the punk.
And Pacino has to go undercover, and he's this like ambivalent kind of void character where he clearly starts to kind of enjoy it. He starts like seducing guys back to his apartment and gets way past the point that he should. And things start to get weird with his, brunette 70s wife, Karen Allen. And the gay protesters, which have always been wrong about everything, I mean, they protested Basic Instinct. They wanted this, like, positive representation of homosexuality as not being, like, this, like, murderous disease. It was different then. I can understand the need for positive representation. Now the negative representation just seems truthful and cool.
Exciting.
Yeah.
They got their positive representation, which is like two guys in like Lacoste polos adopting or getting a baby via surrogate.
Well,
tiny dogs.
now it's gone like horseshoe theoried back to regular like normie content has negative representation of gays because white gays are considered a political threat. And they humanize white gays by showing them in a mixed race relationship with a black person who knows everything. But white gays, I mean, stuff like Orange is the New Black will have like a villainous white gay. That's seen as this kind of speaking truth to power thing now. But for a while, I guess when they were pushing hard for gay marriage, you had those kind of like, we're just normal married gays who want to adopt an Asian baby named Lily. That kind of thing for a while. But we don't have that anymore. White gays are just demonized now in media. But Cruising, I mean, when I was like 18 or 19, and they still like instilled like the fear of AIDS very strongly in us, but I just felt like Cruising was like a death sentence. Like you had no option but to like live in that particular world and like die early. So I like the occasional like corny positive representation and like positive like gay marriage, like showing that there's another way. But Cruising is just this artifact from, it's like The Exorcist, it's a movie that would have gotten an X rating, but somehow didn't. It shows actual fisting. Friedkin went undercover. You were asking if he was gay. He went undercover in a jockstrap as like research. He's another one of these new Hollywood freaks like Paul Schrader, where it's like they're married to some woman that a gay guy would pick, and all their movies are about like, I had to go undercover in a jockstrap to the leather bar to do research.
I had to.
And good for him. Good for him.
Let's move from the gays to the blacks. How about that? So, I don't know. Do you know? I'm sure Jack knows, but this Exorcist was most popular among ethnic social groups.
They love it.
Hugely popular among black people in America. And the story is that they originally, the studio did not put Exorcist in any black neighborhoods because they assumed blacks wouldn't be interested in it because there were no black people in the movie. But au contraire,
another amazing feature of the movie, all-white cast, which could never happen today.
all-white cast and black people loved it. And so there were lines. I remember people would come from Harlem down to Upper West Side to watch The Exorcist and lined in the middle of the winter in sleet and snow and lined around the block to see it. And the studio figured this out after a couple of months and then started just putting The Exorcist in all the black movie theaters in the country. And to this day, I think, well, horror generally is a genre, but The Exorcist in particular has been extremely popular among African Americans. Do you want to talk about that?
There was a black Exorcist ripoff called Abby. There was a blaxploitation version of The Exorcist called Abby.
Why didn't they just call it the Blaxorcist?
The Blaxorcist. Okay,
It's like
did
a
they
missed
not?
opportunity.
Did they not put it in the black neighborhoods because they thought they wouldn't be interested, or because they were worried about the potential riots?
Well, I didn't want to say that. I mean, I'm just going off the Wikipedia article on this, but I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't know. They love it. Black people love going to the theater and hooting and hollering at the screen.
So we're all experts.
Everybody knows this.
Since we're all experts on black people, let's talk about why they might like it.
It's loud.
Well, I think they have
Cut.
Single mother.
Well,
Cut
yeah,
the
they
camera.
have. Yes.
Cut the camera. Cut the. Sorry.
And they have a down low brother. They have,
Yeah.
They have
They.
Black African Americans specifically. I don't know about. They have this like Haitian Southern slavery voodoo tradition,
Yes.
and then they're also deeply Christian. And I think that in that sense, a single mama family drama like does appeal to them because it's morality that's like understandable to people who are not weird, corrupt, soulless bugmen with an overactive interior monologue, and who are nihilistic and godless and don't believe in anything.
Much truth there.
I think black
Jack?
people, I guess, if you wanted to say something nice, no, it seems like everybody except for like overeducated like white professionals in their late 30s tend to believe in something. I bet you this movie was also a hit with ethnic whites.
Wait, what's an ethnic white?
Like me, or like Karis, he's a Greek, or
Not us.
or the staff in Chris McNeil's house, Carl.
Oh, so like all the like Yankee New York
like,
races.
not like founding stock
Okay.
Americans, but like Slovakians and Greeks and that sort of thing.
Do you want to weigh in more, Jack, on black people before we move on?
I mean, it's just like they love.
I mean,
love a loud audience participation movie where people are like screaming and everybody knows this.
I think it's interesting. I guess for me, like it's what I immediately thought was, well, these are people who were, historically forcibly excluded from American culture and citizenship, weren't allowed to participate in it. And so something that is so countercultural, right? And it's so loudly countercultural would not scare someone who is not part of the culture, right? The dominant culture. I mean, that to me is the first thing I would think.
Oh, wait, Jesus, you know what I just thought of? That book, Ghetto Incest.
Ghetto Incest? Yeah, I'm in possession of that right now. I still haven't read it. I'm kind of.
How do I not know about this
It's
book?
this porn book from the 70s called Ghetto Incest.
Oh my God, I need to get this.
Well, Ghetto. I mean, this is another another topic, but like black incest, like as seen in like The Color Purple and Precious, and it's always been a big like industry.
Oh, good to know. Got to get that book.
People don't want you to know.
Yeah, clearly.
But you mentioned also another important thing about the intensity of the like Exorcist pilgrimage experience is that people had to wait in line in the snow. This was released Christmas Day, 1973.
Christmas Day.
Christmas Day, isn't that scary? And so the process of going to see this is something like unfamiliar today because movie theaters are empty, no one goes to them. But you had to wait in line in the snow for 3 hours before you saw this. So by the time you saw it, you were like totally crazed. So it was this whole pilgrimage element, and yeah, that's something you have to factor in.
Okay, we're gonna do questions in a minute, and if you would like to ask questions or say anything, just I guess raise your hand, and then we have a mic to pass around. Do we still? Yes, thank you. Awesome. So think about your questions right now while I ask them this question. So I'm coming back to like you two, and your feelings and your thoughts and your worldviews, and I'm thinking about nihilism, because I think all three of us have identified this movie and this book as a critique of nihilism or an opposition to nihilism, right? It's anti-nihilism, right? I think that's right. Now, what's wrong with nihilism? And I'd love to hear Anna and Jack speak to that. What is wrong with nihilism to you? Because I'm not sure.
I mean, I think even nihilism, I've never heard it pronounced that way. I think even
nihilism?
Nihilism. I think even nihilists don't like nihilism because if everyone's a nihilist, no one ever gets the upper hand. You need people who are like faithful and the opposite of nihilistic, so that there could be a handful of nihilists are like gays or trans people in that they should be a minority and remain on the fringe, and that's what makes their culture stronger.
And cultural nihilism is something that particularly affected Gen X, a generation that I make fun of all the time because they're living in this permanent kind of Bart Simpson on a skateboard, punk rock world of like rebelling against a supposed Christian hegemony and like the Republicans in power, man. But they're kind of stuck in that world, and that kind of punk outlook works in a society where you have the luxury of enough normal white people around to like run the country and everything. Like there's still like normal like parents and white people. Like now, since the 2010s, like everything is just a free-for-all of like Democrats, Satanism, transgender, like that's the norm, and we see the total decline of quality of life. So being like a punk and saying how you don't believe in anything and you love just destruction and all of this, that's fine if you're not the majority, but now that's the majority.
It's you basically are like a spiritual looter or an actual looter. I was also thinking about how that post-Floyd image of like Pelosi and the Democratic ruling class kneeling in Kenta cloths also has a almost like Reagan possessed by Pazuzu Exorcist vibe.
Exactly, because your lack of belief in anything and your lack of a belief system makes you a prime candidate for it to be replaced by something else, which is this pseudo-religious 2010s wokeness religion.
But unlike other religions, there is no salvation or redemption.
And there's no like endpoint, and there's no definite rules. It's this deliberate shape-shifting communist thing where they can constantly change the rules.
Okay, but last question, and then but I mean, you two certainly don't want to replace that, and I generally agree with your critique of contemporary nihilism, but you don't want to replace it like with the Catholic Church, do you?
I don't.
Right. Okay. I
mean, I don't personally, but I guess I wouldn't be against restoring the Catholic Church to its pride of place. I don't want to live under like a Islamic theocracy, but Catholic. I can't think of anything worse than being governed by like normie cons from Twitter who want to ban porn and think that fashion design is like a satanic pedophile ring.
who are totally like pro censorship and like hate winning. I think there's this current undue focus on Catholicism as the only representation of Christian thought because it's like this sort of counterculturally trendy thing on the internet, and it has good imagery, it's dramatic, it's, you know, like kind of hot topic, like it's a new thing that you can just get into. But like I'm just a normal like kind of Southern Baptist, like loose, like hippie Protestant. There's like all kinds of ways to be Christian, but they kind of tell you you have to be either like a libtard atheist or like a computer Catholic on the internet. And there's this whole middle area where you can just like be a normal American Republican that loves freedom and privacy and everything, and you don't have to do all these like rituals.
Computer Catholic. Don't be one of those. So we got about 20 minutes left. Would love to hear from you if you have any questions or comments, or you want to shout at us, anything. Can you, or actually, we got one up here. Can you bring the mic up? Awesome. Right here.
My name is Father Richard Moran. I'm a priest in the Catholic Apostolic Church in North America. Wow. I also was a African Methodist for 17 years. So I be my pastor to my father. Yeah, that's where I know Brother Mo. There's a lot of things banging around my head. I'm also a Gen Xer. And before I get to my question, I just want to say I forgot your name in the middle. Gen Xers has been taking it in the teeth for the past 25, 30 years. That we were counted as being slackers by NPR when I was 25 years old, when I was watching my friends work their asses off to raise their children. So I'd ask you to take a closer look at Generation X and not make such sweeping conclusions about
no other generation has come up with Sonic Youth branded COVID masks. And I live in Austin, Texas, and have to see every day the old Gen X punk guys with their long gray ponytails wearing Chuck Taylor All-Stars wearing a COVID mask today. Well, so I'm just working from what I'm observing in my real life.
Okay, so just so you know, I'm a professor, and I'm going to tell you that objectively speaking, scientists have shown this. Gen X is the greatest generation. We know this. Go ahead. Continue.
All right. Amen. Thank you. And God bless you.
And Jack is gay, just so you know. Go ahead. Keep going.
I didn't know this was going to be so acrimonious.
I kind of got that impression. So,
which one? The Gen X part or
the gay part?
No, he pretended not to remember my name, so.
Okay, everybody settle down. Your question now.
All right,
your question.
Right. So when you were bringing up before the girl was possessed in the Exorcist, and that she was reduced to her bodily functions, that one of the main tenets of Christianity is that we're sinful human beings in the need of a savior, and that throughout my walk with Christ and getting in touch with those things that I criticized myself for and felt unforgivable for, that for me, I'm only speaking for me, that the need for a savior makes more and more sense the longer I live. So if we look at humanity as people who are merely just bodily functions, and that we look, say, from the point that the movie was made and the trajectory of our society, our politics, and how nihilistic they have become, how reduced people have become to commodity, that say, for the sake of argument, that there is something demonic going on in our society. And then you asked about people making self-sacrifice. Who are you asking? because what came to mind who are you asking? Is it people in general? I mean, when I was an African Methodist and was operating in a culture that I was unfamiliar with, I thought I was familiar with it, but it took many years for me to understand I didn't know anything about black people.
We know everything. Do you any questions? Okay.
And that when you see community in the ghetto, when you see one of the most integrated places in America is the barroom in the ghetto, that there are people always making sacrifice. There are always white people and Chinese people and people of all walks of life that are not wealthy enough to feed themselves from day to day, that are continually making self-sacrifice. As human beings, that we're really all on the same playing field because we all are qualified by our bodily functions. Who is the one that you are asking to make these self-sacrifices?
I can answer that in a very short and sweet way. I'm asking you, not you. I'm asking me, you. Like, actually hearing you talk really unlocked and solved something for me, because I never really got behind this whole Catholic, everyone's a sinner thing. It feels, suffocating and manipulative. It always bothered me as somebody who was raised not my choice as an atheist. But now hearing you talk, I really understand what is meant by that. It means not that you're irredeemable unless you become a Catholic and give confession and then you're saved, and that you should torture yourself and suffer. It means that you're going to fail and make mistakes in life. And I think what I mean by self-sacrifice isn't like throwing yourself out of a window. It's turning off the inner monologue, not thinking so much about yourself. That's the selfishness, and that's the indulgence and the unwillingness to sacrifice. Once you stop doing that, as they do in Christianity, as they do in the program, which is a Christianity-based methodology, I think it gives people like an easier framework to live by, and to be in service to others and that sort of thing.
I think that people just, like you said, need to stop thinking. Need to stop delving inward so much and thinking about themselves in these cliched psychiatric terms. Like, currently everybody is just so focused inward on like how they need to improve themselves through endlessly going to therapy, what they identify with from a catalog of different meaningless academic terms. You need to do things where you stop thinking about yourself and create like a body of work or something external which means something. But when I say people need to stop, there's too much self-sacrifice, especially from men, I just mean things like there need to be like borders to countries again. Yeah. Like, not this kind of poisonous idea of like endless empathy and like, I must give everything away to everyone. Like, I'm sorry, it's gone too far. You need borders.
Yeah, like borders and basic due process. And
crime needs to be criminalized.
Sort of thing. But when you say like, I've witnessed ordinary Chinese and black people in the ghetto make extraordinary sacrifices, it's not because they're any more noble. And it's not because we're any more noble, it's because they just don't think about it that in the way that we all do. Our minds are like corrupt and polluted from like thinking and talking too much.
I agree with all that except for the thing about borders. But I'm open borders, bring them all
Really?
in. But anyway, yeah, totally. But you said something at the beginning. So you had two halves to what you were saying there, right? And I want to focus on the first half, which I thought was maybe the most powerful thing you can say about the modern world. It is, to me, the critique of modernity of like the last 200 to 300 years, but especially in this country, the last like 120 years or something, which is the reduction of human beings and the human experience to things like function, right? Not just body parts and body fluids, but what you can do, what you will do, what you can do, right? So we have been reduced, and this is largely through science, right? The ascendancy of science as the experts, not just for how to like figure out, biology and chemistry, but how to figure out how people should interact in the world, how governments should be formed, how societies should be functioning, all of it, right? Science, since about the 19th century, has been the new God, right? And what we saw during COVID was finally people saying, maybe this new God isn't right about everything. And that's been the crisis of experts that we were warned about. You need to stop questioning experts, we were told in 2020, 2021, right? So, and I noticed when I started looking at modernity and how it did that to human beings and the human experience, reducing to functionality, right? Which I got, and I came at it from a French fag postmodernist critique, right? Like, fuck that. But like, then I noticed, partly when I started hanging out with people like Jack a bit, was that, oh, you know who else has been critiquing that since the jump? Catholics and Orthodox Christians have been saying, these are God's children. What are you talking about? They're not body functions, right? These are human beings. These are God's children. These are sacred, right? Autonomous, beautiful things that should be treated as such, right? And to me, so there's an interesting, amazing, in a sense, alliance maybe between the postmodernists, right? And not Protestant, post-Enlightenment Christians, but the good old-fashioned OG Christians, the Orthodox, the
No,
Catholic.
it's some of the Protestant ones.
Some.
It's not just Catholics.
For sure. But that's, I really love that critique that you make, and I think it's exactly right. And, again, you'll find like reams of academic literature about how that's what modernity has done to human beings, has reduced them. And so I love that, and that's why I've sort of been very fond of, as I said, like traditional Christianity since then. So thank you for that.
Thad, how do you feel about abortion? Just kidding, don't answer that.
The more the better. I don't know. I mean, okay. It's about me for a second. So my position is I am pro-choice, but I absolutely, totally respect the pro-life position, and I have to say, no one can ever disprove it. You simply cannot disprove that it is murder. You can't. You also can't prove it.
I love how there's a baby crying in the
I
distance.
know. That was on cue. Thank you, Zane. I know the baby, so it's okay. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's where I am. Now you know who I am a little bit. I have a deep respect from my postmodernism for the spiritual, for the religious, because to us, again, fag, French, whatever, we don't think there's any absolute truth, right? So everyone has equal claim to it, and I have a lot to learn from priests and people in this, Father Damien, et cetera, and you, right? I think there's always wisdom and knowledge from all those angles, so thank you. Yeah, that's me. All right, we got another question here?
I always wanted to.
I can't see the crowd at all. Oh, right here? Go for it.
I actually had a statement that I wanted to say because all three of you just started clicking different parts of my head. You said something about narcissistic people being our country currently being behaviors being narcissistic. You said something about people with disabilities, and so yeah, I just had a bunch of points that I wanted to talk about within the movie that I like. So I'm a black man, African American. I'm also, more importantly to me, is my disability, right? So I'm born with one eye, blind in one eye, barely can see out of the right one, right? But what I found interesting in the movie was that when I watched it, and we recently watched it for our podcast and stuff, I noticed that, and it was a point when they take her in, do all the experiments, right? As somebody who's grew up with a disability, who's 29 years old now, we talk about labels in a way where people use them because they feel like it's easy, but they don't realize the dangers of it. So for example, I was in special ed, but does that make my intelligence lower than anybody else, right? It just means that, like, typically you would hear the word special ed and most people would say to you that this person may have mostly a learning disability, or there's this problem with them, right? And that's usually the general sentence, but no one really understands those things. They don't really go deep, right? I know I'm more intelligent than most people around me, but I had to start at this point because the system created it to be at this point, right? So I have to say. So what I notice about the movie is what I'm trying to get to is that within Reagan's situation, being that it's in the 70s, no one knows how to label correctly. They don't have the knowledge, the education, and throughout time, we start to see these labels stick into society. And the detriment to like children is that there is no protection, right? God is this protection, but like the adults, everybody becomes selfish, and everybody's doing drugs, they're partying, they're not worried about the next generation. They already made these labels, but they're not completely understanding everything. And it's through time and through trials and errors of people failing that then we get to the point where we go, okay, well, we understand it's about gay men or lesbians or trans. We now have this information, but it doesn't fix the problems that we have already experienced as a society. Because as somebody with a disability, I am only a few smaller than the minority of being black. I'm even in a smaller category, and I have to deal with whatever labels, whatever the system has created. And all the trickle down, any effect that the able body, if the country decide to go to war, if y'all decide these politics, it all trickles down to people with disabilities. And usually, because of the labels, we don't get that privilege of actually being heard or understood, or the research, or the funding going into the people that probably need it more than, no offense to anybody who's gay or trans or anything else like that. These are kids who are usually autistic, have learning disabilities, who can go out to do great things, but have to try harder than most able-bodied because we don't have the same resources as everybody. And it was funny to me is that when I watched that movie as a kid, I just felt like, okay, Reagan feels everybody's poking in her brain. They're saying all these things, but no one knows, right? No one knows. They're telling you what they think they know, but they don't really know. And it's not until somebody with spirit, faith, comes in, understands the situation, and explains the situation, even though no one believes it or cares to believe it, but they just go with this different route. And that's what I felt like as a kid going, I'm like, yeah, well, there's always going to be, somebody has to step in and give strength and voice to those who are typically not even being seen. But going back to the narcissistic thing you were saying earlier, it's like I personally, as 29, feel like everybody is being narcissistic because when I look back, when I think about these kids that you see in special ed, or now I'm like, y'all don't want nothing. There's nothing, like, y'all not doing much for these kids. Everybody's focused on the traveling, the adventures, the lifestyles, the everything else, and are forgetting that if you don't buckle down right now, regardless if you have kids or not, your actions will affect those same kids, the kids like myself, who have to go up and be like, okay, well, I can't see, so how do I navigate with this world?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So it seems, let me ask, is this right, that, so you identified as black? I can't even.
Well, so I'm.
Hold on. Wait. You identify as two things, right?
Yes.
Black and disabled.
Yes.
Right? And you described your disability, right? Which is pretty serious, as I understand it, right? And then you talked about people not paying attention to particular people, maybe like you.
Yes.
Right? And very,
and it comes from my community as well, too.
Yeah. So, but very interested in trans people and gay people and this people, but not you, except the first half, right? Your blackness. Oh, they love that, don't they?
The black.
They can't stop talking about your blackness. And I'm sure if you had just said I'm black, they'd say, and I'm talking about liberal audiences, not us. Oh, hell yeah, come on the stage.
Yes, how can I use
Here's
you?
dinner, here's this job, here's whatever, here's the chair of the history department at Harvard. Okay, but you're saying, though, there's another part of you that you also identify with that is completely different, that is ignored in favor of all these other groups that we're fetishizing.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and to your point...
sorry, identity politics, it turns out, is really limited and actually doesn't care about the people who most need help.
Exactly.
Because some people really do need help in our society, like, for instance, blind people. You just have to have help. But the trans kids at Harvard and Columbia, right, or the gay kids in West LA, they're fine.
They're fine.
But kids who are blind and can't walk, or missing
Yes.
arms, or have neurological disabilities, et cetera, really need help. Is that?
Exactly.
Yes? Okay, good.
Yes. And the politics today don't cover that. It's not even a subject. So much so that everybody's arguing with each other. People who can drive, wake up, you can clean yourself, you can, to me, it's almost funny because the color thing doesn't matter because it's stupid at this point, right?
Can I ask a question?
ahead,
What's
sorry.
the question?
Sorry, I said in the beginning, which is a statement, and just saying appreciating to you guys. Yeah, it was really enjoyable.
I appreciate you, but you seem like you're doing just fine. You have a disability that prevents you from seeing.
And you've got a
you're watching
podcast.
The Exorcist. You have a podcast.
What more do you
and you're-
need, brother?
And
But-
you're at this
sorry about
obscure
that.
festival called Icarus Fest.
And that's the
Of-
beauty of that, right? Like folks.
Tell them about you applying for an insurance license.
Oh no.
Maybe tomorrow.
Yeah, maybe
We'll do
tomorrow.
that story. Cool.
But what I was going to say is exactly, but that's the point, right? It's like, that's what I was saying about being black, for example. That part does not matter to me because I do agree with some politicians and people who are like, okay, yeah, we're black. And what? What are we going to do about it?
Because blackness does not stop you from
exactly,
seeing.
it does not stop you from trying.
From seeing. Blackness does not stop you from seeing.
Exactly.
Your blindness does.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, you're also, you make a good point that real disabilities in the 2010s took a back seat as disabilities became this voluntary fetish object for communist identified people on the internet. And I saw that happening early on in like Tumblr in the 2010s, like just basically like the stereotypical blue-haired online communist person started referring to themselves as disabled as kind of an identity fetish. So people with actual disabilities, because of this wash of kind of voluntary identity ones, got ignored.
Yeah, then they got left behind, and now they've had to overcompensate by adopting the toolkit of the woke and being like loud and annoying instead of just like being, seeking, getting help because they have legitimate disabilities. I know of a woman who has like a clothing line that she does as a side hustle. Called Disabled Grifter.
Yes. And thank you for listening because that, to me, that is really hard to talk out loud about. But to answer your question, it takes a lot of work. And yes, I'm 29 and I'm here and doing, but that took a lot of understanding. Like, okay, well, I'm black. I don't fit in this category. Believe it or not, I'm this, but I also can't fit. So I can't do any of the things everybody else is doing, and I have to try 10 times harder. But yet at the same time, I'm watching the regular world operate: gay, lesbian, straight, black men, rich men, poor men. Yeah. And the only thing you can ever hear from our fellow Americans is whining and bitching. Mm-hmm. So to me, at 2024, I look at everybody and go, shut the fuck up. Grow the fuck up. Because at the end of the day, there's somebody that has less than you, that has to try harder than you. And if you can get up and put pants on and drive your car and go to work and bitch about Starbucks, you're good. You're good. Indeed. It's worse experiences than dealing with Starbucks.
Contemporary politics, and especially identity politics, has left a lot of people out in the cold, right? It just simply doesn't speak for many people, and doesn't address their actual needs.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you for all that. All right, we are. I think we have one more?
I didn't know.
Yeah, there's one more.
One more, okay. And then this will be the last question.
Dope. Last question.
Yeah.
Let's go back to pissing on Gen X's grave.
We're not dead yet.
Your culture is. I think.
I didn't even know you were Gen X. I thought you were a boomer.
Oh. All right. So I think the reason that both Jack and I have such issue with Gen X in particular is we came of cultural awareness in the 90s, so we looked up to a lot of that shit. But the Gen X problem, as I call it, is they have this this parodic stereotype of transgressive art that transgresses nothing because there's no longer any limits to transgress. So they're perpetually stuck in this like Steve Albini, R.I.P., serial killer, fucking porn, all this shit that is shocking to no one because it's like ever pervasive. All while saying, transphobes should be sent to a fucking island or like losing their minds during the 2010s. The whole thing fell apart and it was just like disappointing. A truly subversive work of art has to unveil some kind of uncomfortable truth, such as The Exorcist, which is plainly that evil exists. So my question is, what have we achieved a truly subversive work of art in our era? Can we, and what would it look like?
$1 million extreme world peace was one.
Boom.
Is that Sam Hyde?
Yeah, I agree.
Sam Hyde. Okay.
I was gonna go with Bronze Age mindset because
Yeah.
it's like the first thing that came to my head.
Yeah,
but
I endorse
I'm sure
that
there
too.
have been other ones.
Red Scare,
Our
to me.
podcast-
Red Scare.
Thank
Red
you.
Scare. Perfume nationalist.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not Gen X, but otherwise good. Yeah.
I mean, there are starting to be movies that are dealing with things, breaking through the glass ceiling of liberal thought, dealing with things like Tar and Blonde, and they deal with it kind of obliquely to the point where normie critics don't even seem to understand what's happening, and they all have this sort of gauze of plausible deniability, so you can conveniently say that it's still sort of a mainstream liberal project, but like clearly what's happening in something like Tar, which is about cancel culture, and clearly depicting that as negative. But you had all these like conservatards coming out, when like the kind of YouTube talking head conservatard types coming out and saying, but she's supposed to be bad when Tar came out. So that's like this kind of very limited ability to read movies and read what they're actually about in the time that they're in. But I mean, things are trickling out.
I would say to be subversive in this day and age, to be transgressive in this day and age, is to not hide behind plausible deniability. That's it.
Yeah,
the only
truly.
criteria.
What do you mean by that?
I am.
I just don't get. What do you mean? Not hide.
Well, to not be a fence sitter and generate a work of art that can be read multiple ways. I mean, of course, all works of art can be read multiple ways, but that's Adam who asked the question?
Is that
Yeah,
Adam?
it's me.
That's
Yeah,
Adam
as
Lehrer?
he pointed out, the thesis of The Exorcist is that evil exists, right? And it can be read in multiple ways by multiple people, but it has a very unequivocal moral lesson nested in there. And nowadays you have a lot of directors, they all seem to be Scandinavian. Because Scandinavians love to be like morally condescending, sneering snobs while leaning on their socialist bona fides. We have people like Ruben Östlund or Christoph Borgli who make these supposedly transgressive critiques of contemporary culture, or internet addiction and professional opportunism and stuff like that, but will never denounce the problem at the heart of the matter, which is like left liberal dogma and religion.
I was going to bring up, I think it's Ruben Östlund. It's an example of plausible deniability fence sitting is that Nicolas Cage cancel culture movie.
One of the
Magical
worst
realism.
pieces of shit.
Okay,
haven't
what is
seen it.
what is that called? Okay, so a dream scenario where it comes out, it's clearly like in the first half doing this sort of making the edgy internet-y references, and it's dealing with cancel culture, and he's being canceled for something vague, but it ends up saying absolutely nothing because how it gets your sympathy is he did nothing wrong. So it's essentially saying cancel culture is bad if it affects someone innocent, like you're seeing in this movie. And the whole way that cancel culture operates is that everyone is guilty. Everyone is to some degree guilty of whatever they're accused of. So a critique like that of, oh, cancel culture is bad because see how it could affect only this like nice, innocent guy, that goes nowhere. That is just kind of like lightly using these tropes of today to give you this centrist illusion of knowledge and critique when it's really working more for the bad side, because you don't take a hard line on what is actually creating this cultural climate where things like this can happen,
Yeah,
which
and
is liberals and Democrats.
I haven't seen that movie, but I'm guessing in a work of fiction like that, the Nicolas Cage character is fundamentally good and did nothing wrong in a way that everybody can identify. In reality, the way that it works, the mechanism, is that it's up to some arbitrary left-lib power brokers to decide who did nothing wrong and who's totally in the wrong. So it doesn't even work that way.
And that's this kind of watery milquetoast tactic where, not to use the G word, but like grifters, anti-woke grifters coming out today, you know, after the whole world has been destroyed, with their little books about, their little slim volumes about, here's my list of like people who were canceled who did nothing wrong, that's too little too late, and doesn't reckon with the actual problem. I mean, everyone who is the subject to a cancel pile-on like that, they decide you're guilty. It's, you know, it's out of your hands. You know, like you're never actually innocent. Talking about it in these like kind of as if there's an objective truth to what they're doing is just wrong.
Well, there we are. Thank you very much. Tomorrow, we're gonna reconvene, the three of us on this stage. We're gonna talk about a different movie, The Fountainhead, with different themes, but equally important themes. Thank you all for the amazing questions. Thank you for showing up to Icarus Fest, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To become a patron of the show and have access to bonus episodes, AMAs, and the Unreported News Analysis Show, go to patreon.com/unregistered. Thanks for listening.